All right, everyone, welcome back to Letters of Intent. My name is Pankaj Raval, founder of Carbon Law Group, and your host today on Letters of Intent. Our co-host today is in India, and he'll be joining us again next week. He was there for an IPO of his father-in-law's company, so that's going to be our topic for next week. But today we are really excited to be joined by a fascinating gentleman who I've gotten the chance to know just over the last few months. His name is Jeff Baldassari. Jeff is here because we're exploring the minds of leaders and innovators who've not only achieved success, but also learned how to replicate it. Jeff is the CEO of the Competitive Edge Group, which we'll learn more about. Jeff brings 21 years of COO experience. He has passed the CPA exam, served on several boards, and even practiced law with a national firm that he's probably going to discuss and has some great stories to share with us. He's led turnarounds, built scalable processes, and helped companies boost sales and operations through strategies that actually stick. Today, we're talking about the often hidden roadblocks that keep CEOs from scaling their businesses and the proven processes that Jeff uses to break through them. We're also going to dig into leadership, mindset, and a few questions that maybe you've never heard him answer before. And I'm excited to kind of hear all these fun stories that we had a chance to chat about over lunch. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pankaj. This will be a continuation of you I guess.
Yes.
You may hear a couple of these stories for the second time, but
I love it. Please.
I enjoyed our conversation over lunch a few weeks ago, and this will be fun.
No, this would be great. Yeah. And
you'll find out if we tell the same story the same way twice, or if I have a twist with a dual ending. I don't know. We'll find out.
It'll be the first time for a lot of our listeners, so that's great. Please feel free to add additional details, flourishes that I think, they're fascinating stories. So, maybe we can get into it. Jeff, we have a common background as lawyers, but you are much more than a lawyer, I must say. You understand businesses. You're also one of the few lawyers that have gone, well, not few, but one of the lawyers in-house and help build companies. So maybe you can take us back a little bit to the beginning of your career as a lawyer and how that positioned you to become an experienced and great business person, and maybe walk us through some of those insights you gained in your law firm days.
Yeah, thanks, Pankaj. I think the big thing for me practicing law, I was at Baker Hostetler in their Cleveland office back in the early 90s, at the beginning of my career. I think working in teams was a real eye-opening experience. You don't realize it when you're going through it, but the person to your right, the person to your left is counting on you to get the job done, whatever that role may be. And at Baker, often the matters I worked on, there were anywhere from 3 or 4 attorneys up to 30 or 40 attorneys. There were a lot of attorneys involved, and everyone had to pull their own weight. And it was exciting too. But, we had some interesting clients, obviously being a larger firm, and some challenging legal issues, but it was more the non-legal issues that made it interesting and fun. Versus churning out documents and drafting. I was not on the litigation side, although I did go to court once in my legal career. I was a witness. We liquidated a brokerage firm that had 6 different Ponzi schemes, and I had to go to testify. Essentially, after the forensic accountant spoke or testified, and to attest to how did the bad guy, if you will, steal the money, where to go, and what was the trail, if you will, and then how the statute applied to that under cross-exam. And that was fun. It was my one and only time in court. So that's good enough for me. I could go the rest of my life not going into court.
Yes, exactly. It is a, unnecessarily stressful experience, even for lawyers, going to court. So imagine for, lay people just, without the experience.
I'm a lay person now. So yeah, best lawyer in the world. Yes.
That's fascinating. I remember, we talked during our lunch about, these Ponzi schemes that, I'd seen some recently in the news, and you're saying, oh yeah, this is not anything new. This has been going on for years, in different shapes and forms. I would love to hear your thought, just your perspective on these Ponzi schemes, and why do we continue to see a prevalence of Ponzi schemes?
Well, it's interesting because I was an accounting major, as you shared at the beginning of the intro. I was an accounting major and, passed the CPA, but I didn't want to be an auditor when I grew up. So I went to law school. I was only 5 years out of college, and when I was assigned to this matter, I just first started at Baker Hostetler like a month before this. And I never heard of a forensic accountant. I know they're common today, but this is 1990. Right. And I was like, what is a forensic accountant? Like, what do they do? And I learned his name was Howard. I talked to Howard and learned what he did. And as I listened to him, to your question, I asked a very similar question. Because, you're going to get caught. Like, what's the end game? I'm thinking, as I'm listening to what he does and how he went about it, following the money. We've heard that phrase, follow the money. That's essentially what a forensic accountant does, is put the pieces of the puzzle back together. But what I found in these cases, well, how do these people, how do they end up here? And And what they said was, what Howard said to me, which really made a lot of sense, is they steal I'm just using this as an example. They steal $5, nobody notices. They take 10, nobody notices. They take 20, nobody notices. But here's the problem. They start getting themselves so deep into it, there's no way out. And eventually they're going to get caught. And what opened my eyes, I was only 27 years old when this case started, yet, new to the world. And what I realized was, if you're counting on the government to protect you from the bad guys, if you will, from the people that perpetuate these Ponzi schemes, you're relying on something. The government's not designed to do that. They're designed for compliance.
Right.
Do these guys comply with the law? And the government's position is, if brokerage firms comply with certain regulations, the ability to steal money is very difficult, which is true, but it's not perfect. And so oftentimes, the government shows up to put toe tags on, and, they're just counting the bodies, and because they aren't there before the horses leave the barn, they're there afterwards. And then they go back, well, the compliance was perfect. And the bad guys know this. They know what boxes to check, what reports to file, what's to be said in each file, each report. And that keeps the regulators off their back. But what brings the Ponzi schemes down every time, this is nothing new, it's been going on for 100 years, is there's been a change in the market, or a change in their business model, where more people want their money out than the money that's being put in. And so that happened with the case I was on. There was one particular investor wanted, I think, $3 or $4 million back. He didn't have $3 or $4 million of cash laying around. That's how his whole house of cards came crumbling down. Something similar happened to Bernie Madoff. My old firm, Baker Hosler, did that liquidation, represented the trustee in that liquidation.
Wow.
Same thing. Bernie Madoff's situation was, well, the market changed. It was the Great Recession of 2006, 2008 to 2014. I think in 2009 is when his house of cards came falling down. Same reason. People wanted their money out. The market was going to hell. They wanted to get their money out of it. They were going to, take a much more conservative position in cash, or whatever their choices were. He couldn't pay back all the people who wanted to cash out. And that's what brought him down. That was a big lesson I learned, is don't count on the government to catch the bad guys. You got to do your own due diligence, because the government, they're just not designed to do that.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, I feel like maybe it's an existential question overall in like law, but like, I feel the same way in the law. The law addresses things generally after they happen, right? Like I did human rights law early on. I wanted to become a human rights lawyer, and it was so disheartening, because you see like, oh my gosh, like, yes, these bad actors are sometimes being prosecuted, but it's 10 years after the genocide, 10 years after something happened, and that's a obviously extreme case, but we're seeing this, around the world, unfortunately, right now. But, that's something that's the hardest part, is like, you're a lawyer, you're in the government, but you're like you said, everything has gone to hell. And now you're coming in and trying to, see what happens.
I've never analyzed this, and I'm sure somebody has, but a lot of our laws are reactionary.
Right.
Not all of them, but a lot of them. They react to something that occurred. Like you said, some event occurred. Oh, we have to cover that. We didn't address it before.
Right.
I mean, there's some things we can anticipate when we create regulations and create laws, but not everything. And again, when something bad does happen, they come in to change the laws and change the regulations, but there's going to be victims. There's going to be roadkill in that process, and it's sad, because these are people's lives. This isn't an academic exercise. Of who's right, who's wrong. Somebody's life is ruined in these cases when their whole life savings are gone. They're 70 years old.
Yeah.
They're not going to get a job over at being a greeter at Walmart at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to be said, I think a longer conversation about the importance of institutions and laws today, because, we're seeing a lot of the guardrails being removed even more. So what is that? It opens up for bad actors, even more than we've seen in the past. And now with technologies, just seeing what AI can do, it's a little scary, but I think that's just all the more importance of people need to be aware, have the right, implement their own security, be really vigilant, and, lock your car, and, and lock your computer, like do whatever you can to have strong passwords, because it's wild what people can do now with technology too. So
yeah, it's scary. It really is scary.
So moving from career in law to business, I'd love to know like how you transitioned, because, the mind of a lawyer, I would say, is arguably a bit different than the mind of a business person. So how did you navigate that transition? What was it like? What were some of the challenges that you encountered as you moved from law to business?
The one challenge that I think most lawyers face transitioning from law to business, those that make that leap, I didn't have this issue. I wasn't wired that way. But if you think about it, in most cases, not all, in law, you're playing defense. You're protecting your client from something happening. something bad happening. So it's a defensive mindset. Whereas in business, you have to be defensive and offensive. You have to go on the offense to go after business. What could happen? What is possible? You need to take risks. You need to take chances. You have to make decisions that are, things may not work out the way you expect it to. You may lose money on this deal because it just didn't come to fruition as you expected. Your strategic planning indicated, you should make $1 million on this, and you only made 400,000 or 300,000. It didn't pan out the way you expected. So that first thing is the first hurdle you have to clear. Now, that wasn't an issue for me. I've always been a bit of a risk taker, and I love comfortable going after things and also doing things that don't come with an instruction manual. I've always, in my career, I've done some things, and I've been forced to because of the situations I've been in, where I've had to go a different path, because if I went the path of everyone else, I'd be too late. I get the same returns as everybody else. And I was in a situation where those returns weren't big enough. So we got to do something a little outside the box or beyond the norm. The second thing with the law, this is where I struggled, but the adjustment took me a couple of years. And that is, you're a lawyer, you think about it, all your colleagues in law, they all went to law school. They all have an undergrad degree. They all have a law degree. They've all passed an exam. My case, I wasn't very smart. I took two disciplines. I had to take 2 tests to prove it. But the point is,
you're very smart. You're able to do both.
Again, I say I wasn't that smart. I had to prove it, but I wish I had all those hours back of study. But to the point is, your colleagues are at the same level, relatively the same level, same experiences. Now, when you go into business, you have people with high school degrees, you have people with college degrees, graduate degrees, no degree, or a certificate of education, and maybe a formal graduation. They come from different walks of life. There's a lot of economic, backgrounds, and it changes their perspective. So when you speak, you have to always tell people when I'm working with them, grooming and helping mentor people, is put yourself in the shoes of your audience. Okay. So when you're speaking to factory workers and operations, they don't want to hear about finance or marketing. They want to know how many hours they're going to be working. They're going to get some overtime out of this deal. Do we care if we get this account? What's in it for me? That is uniform or universal with all areas. But when you're talking to salespeople, they don't want to hear about operations. They don't want to hear about finance and so on. So you have to speak the language that resonates with the audience that you're speaking to. But that took me a while to get used to. Not so much the audience thing, but the educational background. So, for example, in law, you're told what to do. You're expected to understand what you're supposed to do. Go do it. Whereas in business, you need to repeat yourself a few times. What's easy for you may not be easy for your audience, only because they're not as familiar with it.
Yeah.
Or you're pushing your organization, your teams, to stretch outside their comfort zone. So they do need some repetition. They need some hand-holding. They need some support, knowing that you have their back, and to explain it so they thoroughly understand it and don't feel bad if they don't understand it right away. And so it took me a while to get to that. I used to say, I don't want to have to babysit everybody, but it's not babysitting. So now I think the pendulum switched the other way, where I tell people 4, 5, 6 times, I'm like, okay, I got it after 2. I got it, but you want to make sure, because you all have to be on the same page, just like in law, but it's a little bit more challenging in business just because of the educational backgrounds of the people involved.
I love that. It's so true. I mean, I think you make 2 great points. I love the fact that you talk about, in law, I do find it's very defensive. You play that one side very well. You focus on defense, and you're kind of a defensive specialist when it comes to being a lawyer. But then, in business, you have to play both sides. You have to play both sides of the ball, for a sports analogy, right? You got to understand offense and defense. Got to get back when something happens, and I'm a big basketball fan. So understanding that in that context makes a lot of sense. And then, repeating yourself, I founded a law firm. So I also kind of wear the entrepreneur hat as well. And the importance of, I found early on in my career, just making sure people understand you. I even have a handoff checklist that I've used in the past of okay, when I tell someone to do something, I ask them, okay, what do you understand the task to be? Right? Because it's so important that people understand what you're saying, because we think everything we say is crystal clear, right?
Oh, everything I say is crystal clear.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me.
It makes 100% sense to me, right? Yeah. I mean, of course. Yeah.
I always tell people we both can't be wrong, so I must be right.
Yeah. So I think, just the importance of, communication and repeating yourself in different ways for the different audiences, I think is such valuable advice when leading a company, because I think you're right. I mean, communication really is, I think, is one of the fundamental elements of a successful organization. From my perspective too, is that, if you cannot communicate well with your team, your investors, with your stakeholders, then you're going to have a very hard time building a business, because no one's going to be on the same page as you, and you're going to be very frustrated probably.
You made a great point there early on when you said, when you ask your teams to echo back what you just said, because if they can echo it back, then you're going to have a better feel to be really understand what I'm talking about. And I think it's a great tool to use.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you, in your career, I would love to hear, like, if there was a mentor or person that you felt helped shape your career, or how did you even look at like mentorship, and was there anyone in particular you can think of it early on in your career that helped really guide you, and what kind of lessons did they give you?
Yes, we all have mentors. I had multiple mentors over my career. I still am mentored, and you can be mentored up. I mean, people that, you may be senior to them in an organization, but everyone could be a student. Everyone could be a teacher,
Right.
So, but the one thing I do remember distinctly was my mentor at Baker Hostetler, Dick Hollington, corner office partner. I mean, this guy was big time.
Uh-huh.
And when he walked in a room, you knew it. So he had a presence about him. He was Harvard grad, law school. That's not what caught your attention about him. He was and he was a businessman as well. And his family had a bank as,
Wow.
as a little side hustle. Everybody's got one of those, right? A little community bank. But Dick, when Dick walked into a room, you knew it. He was bigger than life. And he exuded confidence. He exuded personality. And that's not for everybody. But for me, it really, at a firm that I was at that had a lot of Ivy League attorneys, a lot of incredibly talented professionals, and a lot of incredibly talented clients, you had to have confidence, and you had to project that confidence, because you're representing a client in some way, shape, or form. They want to make sure the people that are representing them are just as smart, just as confident as they are.
Yeah.
And that you got this. You know what you're doing. I think with Dick, whether it was social settings, business, you knew Dick when Dick was in the room. And that was a really good, and he wasn't the only one, but he was the one who really stood out, for me to learn that, and it's not something out of a book. It's just the way you carry yourself.
Yeah.
And not to be, and Dick was not one to brag about himself. He didn't need to. His actions spoke for themselves. And I think I learned that a lot from a lot of people. And probably you may have heard this before. I mean, I have as well, in that the most successful people in this world don't have to brag. They're confident who they are, and their actions speak for themselves. And I think, that's you learn a lot from that. But yes, I mean, I did have attorneys at Baker, and even when I was at Taylor, learning from my engineers, learning from the people within the organization, learning from the factory workers, because they knew how to, these guys were craftsmen. We made high-end office furniture in my first CEO role. And I learned a lot from the guys and gals on the line. They had such pride in what they did, and the nuances that they did, that the effort and commitment and care they put into be, whether it was a chair or a desk, the upholstery, the finish, whatever it may be, the woodworking. You learned a lot from these folks, and you could feel and sense their passion. And I think, there's something to be said about that. And I think, you got to be attuned to what's around you. And that helps round you out, make you a better person, to take pride in your work. No matter what you do, can you carry yourself in that manner and take the same level of pride as other people around you for what their craft is? You should have that same amount of pride in what you do.
It makes me wonder, like in terms of, I mean, there's a lot of debate about whether, some of these characteristics can be learned or they're kind of born with it. I think, nowadays there's more evidence that, probably they can be learned, but I'm wondering, let's say someone aspires to be a confident person. Maybe they feel like they're not very confident now in their career. Maybe they're experiencing doubt. Do you have any insight or suggestion on how they might navigate that if they want to be like this person like Dick, like, walk into a room and project confidence, but maybe they just feel like they don't have that right now?
The best advice I give, I think one of the most toxic things any of us can do, even if you are confident, don't compare yourself to others.
I love it.
That's what ruins a lot of people's confidence. And, I don't care if it's socially, personally, professionally. When you start comparing yourself to others, you're done, because there's no upside to that whatsoever, because no matter who you compare to, there's somebody better. Pick your category, pick your metric. Somebody made more money, helped more people, saved more jobs. Pick your category. It doesn't matter. There's always somebody out there.
I agree. Yeah.
So that's what if somebody is suffering or is a little shaky on their own self-confidences, I would just be confident in what you've done, the work you put in, and do the best you can. Be true to who you are, and don't go beyond that. And I think if you avoid the comparison, game, you can avoid knocking yourself down many notches. When you start building yourself up, saying, "Man, I put a lot of work in. I did that." I'm proud of that because that took a lot of sweat, blood, and tears to make that happen, whatever it is. And that's how you build confidence. Is if you've given it your all, and don't worry about outcomes. It's about effort because the outcomes will take care of themselves. Nobody bats 1,000. Nobody wins every time. And so when you do have success, revel in the small victories too. That's another thing I think people fail at. All of us do. We don't celebrate the little things. We only wait for the big celebrations, and you should obviously celebrate the big stuff, but you should, the journey. I mean, life's a journey, not a destination. Celebrate that journey, the steps along the way. Even if you don't make it to your ultimate goal, you made it farther than you were before you started the journey. So there's something to be said about that, and it should build your own self-confidence. Like, wow, I'm a better person today, or stronger, smarter, whatever label you want to put on it, than I was a week ago, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think you're so right. I think, there's that saying, this quote, I don't know who said it, but like, comparison is the thief of joy, right? I think it really is. And I even tell my daughter sometimes, and, I think about it to myself too, is like the importance of like learning to run your own race, right? You cannot try to compete against those others around you. And that's really hard, because, we live in a society that often, rewards people who come in first. But in life, it's different, right? Life is not always this linear race where whoever's at the end gets a number 1, 2, or 3 gold medal, right? It's about, your experiences, what makes a fulfilled life, right? And who do you help and who can you touch, right? Like, you do a great job of giving back and helping people. And I think that's really admirable because, sometimes people always, a lot of people ask like, what's in it for me? But I think it's this idea of like, what if you can help others, then oftentimes you'll be taken care of, right? That's my philosophy. The more you can do for others, the more often you'll get what you want in life. It may not be immediately, but I think in the long run,
it'll be your turn someday. It's going to come back. I agree with you 100%. Yep.
So moving to a little bit to like competitive edge, and then I do want to talk a little bit about like, deal making, because, you have this experience of deal making. We are a law firm, it's kind of, we talk about deal making and risk taking a lot in our firm, and who we help as entrepreneurs. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you worked at this company, leading turnaround, and then you went to competitive edge. So tell us a little bit more about that transition. What led you to now the current company you're at?
Yeah, so with the Competitive Edge Group, I started the firm a little over a year ago in the spring, early summer of 2024. I did it because I've had 2 roles as a CEO, 21 years between the 2 firms. I was seeking to find another CEO role, but I started running into the purple squirrel syndrome. I had 2 opportunities, and then for both cases, I didn't have an engineering degree, so I wasn't the right fit. I'm like, I can't keep playing this game. I can hire an engineer. I don't need to be an engineer. Engineer doesn't think like I do. You want to grow this business? I know how to do that. And I can bring the people around me to build up the organization, seek the contribution, get the employee engagement, and make it occur. I just thought, you know what? I've learned a lot in all these years. Why not work with the clients I'd like to work with? And instead of being a CEO when you have 20 things to worry about, if I go into an engagement, it's like 3 things to worry about. Or 5 things. It's a far less number of things. And it's a lot of fun. And to your point earlier, and that is, I'm building an organization up. I just don't go in to solve a problem. I teach them a proven process that will not only solve that problem and transcend it, but it's going to transcend the problem. So it transforms the organization, transforms the culture. So then it's a new organization. People feel, to your point earlier again about like being empowered. I can do this. We can do this. We believe in ourselves. Oftentimes when I go into some client situations, there's a lot of self-doubt in the air. You could feel it. Like, oh God, we're not doing well. We haven't been doing well in a long time. We're never going to get out of this. This is our destination, or destiny, I should say. And no, stop that. And here's how we're going to work our way through this. And I think also when you start to value people's perspective, when you ask that simple question, what do you think? You're implicitly stating, I think you have something of value to contribute. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are, what you see. I'm not expecting you to connect the dots, but I would like to hear what you're seeing from where you sit, work, stand in the organization. And so the competitive edge for me was I had a side hustle when I was interviewing, and I was like, well, this is fun. Why don't I just make this a full-time job? And I incorporated the business. And then Leslie joined me. Leslie Morales was with me at US Rubber. We got the band back together again, and she's got 34 years of experience in enterprise rent-a-car, 22 years as an executive. And our skills really complement each other because she's really good at things that I'm not as good at, and I'm good at things that she's not as good at. And I require adult supervision, and she provides that for both of us. So, but it's a lot of fun working with the people you enjoy working with, like Leslie and I, and then the people we serve.
Yeah.
And we're making a difference beyond just, wow, your sales went up $3 million. I want that organization to be transformed in that it's now a new place. People believe in each other, they're having fun, and we're growing, and we're working together to make it a better place for the future.
Yeah, I love that. When you go into these companies, is there one question? I'm sure there's probably several, but is there one question or one kind of data point you look for first to see like how they're doing?
No, I don't have one. No,
Okay.
what the hell's going on in this place? No, I don't have a single question. So I typically ask, the question I do ask is, I go down two paths. One is, what are your aspirations and what's your frustrations? I want to hear, and not from just one person. I mean, I typically start with the CEO, founder, but I want to hear from the organization. And I also want to find out, the third question is, do you believe we can get to whatever or solve fill in the blank? Because I got to figure out what their belief system is. And, but no, it's like, it's just no different than law. You got to ask a lot of probing questions, and it's a fresh perspective of questions. So what ends up happening is, we start digging in after I kind of get, okay, we're going to focus on this area that's frustrating us, whatever it may be. Then Leslie and I start asking a fresh perspective question. So, because we don't have any preconceived notions, we're not from the industry. We're not carrying any baggage. So we may ask, and not we definitely do ask questions they've never been asked before. Now, maybe 8 times out of 10, we'll ask some really good questions. 2 times out of 10 are stupid questions, but ignore those, okay? But the fresh perspective ones, what's good about those is we get the clients and the people we're working with to think differently and go, wow, I love hearing this. I never looked at it that way. I never thought about it that way. And that's what opens up the possibility. So what ends up happening is fresh perspective. We have a ton of experience. We say, hey, here's what we did in a situation like this. We share our experiences. And then we blend and we co-create the solution by blending in their institutional knowledge, because we don't have that. They do. Blend in the institutional knowledge with our fresh perspective, our experience, and now we got something to work with, and we're off to the races. So that's the approach we take.
And how do you install that new belief system? Because I feel like you've got to change. I mean, I guess, does this change come from the ground up or the top down?
Ground up. Oh, I am anti-top down.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I'm in the anti-top down camp. So
you got to get buy-in from the employees, from the people.
Well, it's not even a buy-in. They're going to get, here's how it happens. Through a process we use is appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is to bring a diversity of people to the table to contribute their perspective to solve problems. And you want people from the front lines, you want leadership, front lines, adjacent departments, and then perhaps, not always, perhaps outside stakeholders, supply chain partners, customers. And what you're looking to do is to gain perspective and contribution, because when people start contributing, they now emotionally own the outcome. Now they've been heard. The biggest hurdle that there is leadership, because leadership wants to talk. And when you start talking as leaders, you intimidate the lower level frontline people, and you may not invite the right frontline people or enough of the frontline people to the table, and you're not going to get their perspective. And someone on a factory floor, someone in the warehouse, someone out in the sales field, they see things you don't see in your ivory tower sitting in the corner office. They see things, they see, feel, and hear things that can't be found on a spreadsheet, okay? So by inviting a variety of people to the table, you're giving them a chance to contribute to the solution. They will emotionally own the outcome. They're not being told what to do. There's no engagement when they say, Pankaj, you do this, Jeff, you do that, Bob, you do this over here, and Sally, you do that over there. You're being told what to do. And if you don't do it, how many times are you going to whip the donkey?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And also, it's not my idea if I'm one of those 4 people and the boss told us what to do. But when you're helping to solve the problem and be a part of it, now you own it. And you're going to make the extra effort that nothing falls between the cracks. And I remember the great story I heard in Cleveland. The gentleman who pioneered appreciative inquiry is a professor at Case Western Reserve University. His name is David Cooperrider. And he was brought in to help out a consumer goods firm, and they had a packaging issue. I don't remember the details, but he facilitated the meeting because this is kind of like playing golf. I can tell you, Pankaj, this is what you got to do. These 5 things, okay? And that's like reading how to play golf in a book. You don't have a club in your hand, so you need me who's been there to show you how to really, here's the cadence, here's what it really feels like to make this happen. Same thing, that's why I brought David Cooperrider in. And one of the people at the table was the receptionist. And this company, it was a receptionist who said something, and it was her idea that saved this company $500,000 a year.
Wow. The receptionist.
Now,
wow.
Not because she connected the dots. She just said, hey, this is what I'm hearing on the phone. People are speaking to me. They're writing to me. I'm seeing it. Because as a CEO, no one ever tells you the whole story. That's just the way life is, okay? And so when you bring in people from other levels of the organization, they're going to hear, see, and feel things that you're not. And also, that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet or a financial statement. These are emotional issues sometimes. And so they took advantage of this, and they had an incredible outcome. Now, that's an extreme example, but it's not an uncommon example, because I know in my own experiences, time and time again, I had people from throughout the organization contribute to the solution, and it's things I would have never thought of on my own. Okay, wow, I got this big degree, all this schooling, all these years in the C-suite. Who cares? I'm not at the factory floor. I'm not on a sales field hearing from the customers, okay? I may have an idea, but that's not going to get us very far. So that's the idea, is inviting people to the table, allowing them or giving them the opportunity to participate. That's what the difference is. There's ownership, engagement, and things start. That's how the culture gets changed.
Absolutely. I love that. It's so true. Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And it's not easy, but I think, keeping that in mind, the ownership and engagement, the appreciative inquiries, it makes so much sense. I have to read that. I have to look into that. Is there a book that he wrote about this, or is that what it's called?
No, there's a bunch of books on appreciative inquiry. It's been around since 1993. So it's 30 plus years old, 32 years old. But there's organizations for appreciative inquiry that you can find out a lot. Or I have a live event. I speak on it.
Okay. All right. We'd love to. Yeah, we have to get that information. We'll put that in the show notes. Because I mean, it almost sounds like today. I always often hear, I work with coaches. I have a business coach that even says, lead with curiosity. And I try to do that with my personal relationships and professional relationships too, because oftentimes, again, we were talking about at the beginning about like, hey, what I'm saying should be crystal clear. It makes perfect sense to me, right? But oftentimes it doesn't make sense to other people around you, and no one can read your mind. And I think that's so important. And I think it's really a disservice to believe that someone can read your mind or should know what you're thinking, about anything, unless it's really clear that you've laid it out. I think leading with curiosity, that appreciative inquiry is so important.
Yeah.
In
some
building a
things can be
business.
counterintuitive. Like you said, on paper, this makes total sense, but in reality, it doesn't. It's just not the way the world works sometimes.
Yeah. Last question. Is there something you've changed your mind about in the last 5 years?
No, not I think things have evolved. So if you want to call it changing, yes, I keep learning more, in the sense that as life goes on, I mean, the world's dynamic, okay? And what worked 5 years ago does not necessarily work as well today. Everything has a shelf life, and it may not have expired yet, but it's not as effective as it was 4 or 5 years ago. I think the biggest thing that just keeps repeating itself, but the nuances is to figure out the combination to make it work, is the concept of people. Because, life is easy until people get involved. Or everything in life is easy until people get
Yes.
involved. And so the question becomes with every organization, how do I overcome the people component? So the approach is, when you say change your mind, I may change my approach with people. So when I go into engagements, like there's sometimes I'll go out there and I will show up in jeans and a polo shirt like this, or a t-shirt, and I have my steel-toed shoes on, and I'll go out in the warehouse. I'll go out in the factory, just start talking to people. They don't know who I am. And I just tell them I'm a helper. I'm here to help. I'm helping somebody. And that's what I am doing. When you get them to put their guard down and just listen and quit telling them, hey, according to this theory, here's what we should do. Or I want to hear what they have to say. And it was funny. My first client, I mean, I'm not exaggerating. For the first month, I must have discovered 3 or 4 new problems just by doing that. I go out in the
Yeah.
factory, I just start talking to people and they start telling me something like, wait, say that again. And they
Yeah.
would tell me more. And I'd look into it like, oh boy, here's something else we got to fix. Because if we don't fix this, what we just fixed is going to fall apart because, they're all connected.
Yeah.
There's a labyrinth of issues in any kind of business and nothing is a complete silo. So, but I think that's it. I think it's more of the evolution, but I've changed my mind, not necessarily, but my approach has evolved.
Approaches evolve. Absolutely. Absolutely. More iterative than, necessarily change. Yeah. Which makes perfect sense. Yeah, because I think, the world is changing so fast. It's so dynamic. Business is changing, technology, there's so much, but you're right. But I think the one constant is people, right? And I think that's always been the challenge, I think, for a lot of businesses is how do you deal with people? And now we have technology in some ways trying to replace people, right? There's a lot of talk about AI replacing people, but does it? So it is interesting, though, that conversation about how people and technology will work together, what will be replaced. And I think that's something probably we could talk about for hours in the future. About maybe our next episode. Jeff, can you tell people a little bit more about where they can find you, any resources, any online, where they should go to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And then I think the easiest place is on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Jeff Baldassari. I'm not hiding. You can find me on LinkedIn very easily. Our website, thecompetitiveedgegroup.com, no spaces or dots, thecompetitiveedgegroup.com. That's 2 great, easy places to find us. And I always welcome a conversation. So, if I can give somebody some direction, some help, if it leads to an engagement, great. If it doesn't, that's okay, because maybe they don't need a full engagement, just need a little bit of direction, and I'm happy to give it to them. They could run with it, and it makes you feel good when you see people do better, whether it's a full engagement or just an idea, because they could take that idea and make it tenfold, better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your time and just your willingness to give and be so helpful. I was very, touched and appreciative when you offered to introduce me. You whipped out your book of diary of a journal of all the people you can introduce me to. And, and I was so amazed because, that's, I think that's it's so nice. And, you don't always see that with a lot of people who have had success. But, I think it's what we need in this world of people wanting to help each other and lift each other up. And, I think you're a perfect example of that. This has been really great. I always enjoy talking to you. I got more stories, more insights about leadership. And I feel like I always learn something every time I talk to you. So thank you again for sharing your knowledge, sharing your insights and experiences with us. I know our listeners, I think, will find this very helpful as they manage their growth and manage the change that's coming in the economy. But I think, if you guys are looking for help, Jeff is a great person to talk to help navigate and grow your business.
Okay, thank you, Pankaj. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. And I've always enjoyed our conversations. It's good. And I look forward to the next one, whether it's a podcast like this or just over lunch. So
absolutely.
That works well for me.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.